At this time, I'll call to order the Oak Island Public Hearing and Regular Meeting of September the 10th, 2019. And we'll start off by asking Councilman Lehman Scott to give us a moment of silence in honor of 2/11 this tomorrow.
We could stand, please, and tomorrow's the anniversary of 9/11, where we lost over 3,000 Americans in one act. And if we could just have just a moment, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
The Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Scott. I want to say it's good to see everybody out and everybody made it through the Hurricane Dorian. I'd like to thank God it didn't do any more, and to thank the Weather Channel for giving us 11 days to pray about it. So we're going to start with the public hearing number 1. The purpose of the public hearing is to hear citizens' comments on the proposed amendment to Section A.3, definition Section 10.104.1, fill of the Unified Development Ordinance, an amendment to the definition and regulations regarding the field. Do we have anyone signed up, Lisa?
Yes, Joe Stanton.
Mr. Stanton or anybody that speaks, please give us your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Joe Stanton, 110 East Beach. At the meeting in December, I asked that the town consider getting some signs for Beach Drive, telling people how or where to turn to get off Beach Drive. You run up and down Oak Island Drive, you got signs everywhere. One of them even says the next beach access is 2.5 miles. But there's no sign anywhere on Beach Drive telling people where they can turn to get off. And you'd be surprised how many people miss 40th Street, Middleton, and a few other streets, very few that you can get off the beach on. We need signs coming east and west, pointing that out. Now on March the 12th, the town manager called me and told me those signs were being made, and even read to me what they were going to say. But as yet, there's no signs. Need to do something along this line to where people will know. You'd be surprised how many people do turn around now. And thank goodness we didn't get hurt too bad during the storm. And I think the police department did a good job guarding our properties. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton.
I don't have anyone else signed up for the public hearing.
All right, this time I'll entertain a motion to close public hearing number 1.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Show of hands. Thank you. Council may take action on this proposed amendment tonight. Would you like to have Jake?
Jake.
A summary?
Please.
Sure. So this is a staff-initiated text amendment. The fill ordinance was adopted in 2015, and then some revisions were made to it in November of 2018. The purpose of it is to set a cap on the amount of fill one can bring on their site in order to acquire a LOMA. The current ordinance permits fill to be no greater than 1 foot above the crown of the road, or even with the adjacent lot, which as there's less, and then goes on to say, unless you are applying for a LOMA, which I'll explain in a minute, it gives an exemption for that. So LOMAs, as part of the flood ordinance, is usually issued when a property is inadvertently mapped, when you are in a specific flood zone or in a floodplain. And so LOMA amends the NFIP flood zone map. And a LOMER, there's a difference. A LOMER is a modification to the map as well, but the modification is made due to physical changes on the site, i.e. fill being brought in to elevate yourself out of the special flood zone area. So that's the difference between one's an inadvertent mapping and then one's a modification based on fill, essentially. So the proposed fill ordinance sets what we consider a reasonable limit and prevents one from installing an excessive amount of fill that could potentially negatively impact a neighboring property. The point of a LOMA or LOMER is to take oneself out of the floodplain, not to take advantage of the fill ordinance. This is something that we are just being proactive on with this text amendment. We have not seen this be something that has been exploited in the past. We're just noticing it now so we can prevent that from happening in the future. So currently there is no cap to fill if one was to apply for a LOMER, and so this ordinance would go more restrictive with the fill requirements by setting that 2-foot limit there. And just as a side note, any amount of fill brought in at a construction site that exceeds 1 foot, it has to have engineered fill plans showing how the water will be retained on site or directed to the the stormwater infrastructure and not running off onto the adjacent neighbors. So that's my summary.
Okay, so if you're applying for a letter of map amendment and you have to add more than 1 foot fill, which is what the cap that we set in December, you're saying that you have to have the engineer approval?
Yes, that's a good summary.
Jake, let me ask you this. Can we reduce that instead of 2 foot to 1 to match what we already have in place? And second, the lots that back up to Davis Canal, when high tide comes in, a lot of those lots will flood. So if you go in there and you add fill dirt to those lots, you're going to be pushing that water to adjacent lots. How is all that going to be addressed?
Part answer. Like I said before, any fill more than 1 foot requires the stormwater stabilization plan. So it addresses all of that. If you have a lot next to a major water feature, you've bought a lot next to a major water feature. It kind of comes with the territory that there's going to be water issues. There's flooding. There's typically wetlands next to those environmentally sensitive areas, all that kind of stuff. Of course, you can change it to 1 foot if that is the discretion of the majority of council, however you vote. I mean, you can change it to whatever you like. We set 2 feet because we felt that was reasonable based on what past, applications we've seen.
How many times are we running into this, Jake, with the need it to be up that much higher?
I anticipated that question. In fact, I had started to create a report attached to this to answer that, and what I thought I was going to get was a big spreadsheet filled with data where I can show you the mean and average and all that kind of stuff. And turns out, from our previous flood zone map, as you guys know, the new one was adopted in August of last year, but from the one that was in place before that, for a good 10 years, it's only been a handful of times, 4 or 5 times, where someone has needed to go between the 2 to 4 foot fill range to obtain a LOMER. So there's not a huge data set to go by, otherwise you would have it. So, and that goes to what I was saying earlier. It's not something we've seen traditionally as being exploited that could, harm the neighbors. We just don't want it to occur in the future.
Let me ask you this question too, because I rode around and looked. You've got a house here, you've got a house here, you got an empty lot. This side of the lot's 4 foot, this side of the lot here is level with the road. Where's the field going to go to be even with your neighbor's yard?
Well, you can't go above your neighbor. You can only go even. And the reason for that is to cause water not to flow in a direction that it did not flow before. So if you have one neighbor that's higher than you on this side, you can go even with him over here, but when you're over here, you're gonna have to have a slope. You can't go higher than the neighbor on the other side of you as well. So you could have, you could fill up, if you're lower than both at the same time, you could fill up even here, and it would have to be a grade, but that wouldn't really impact the runoff in a negative way, because you're still not higher than either neighbor.
So what you're saying is, as long as the water moves and it doesn't collect in one spot, in other words, you're not creating a pond, is that the idea?
The idea is not necessarily, I wouldn't put it that way. The idea is not to cause water to flow in a direction it did not flow before, particularly in a way that could harm the neighbor. Yeah, that's why we have it even rather than above.
So Jake, first of all, thank you for untangling this. This has more acronyms than a Pentagon document. I mean, reading it is really a challenge. So the origin of this is staff initiated. We are being proactive, but there's no actual case history to demonstrate that we need to be more restrictive. Is that fair?
Yes, but I would add to that, in order to obtain that case history, if that's what you want, what you have to do is let a problem continue and be exacerbated before you could nip it in the bud, which, we don't want to cause.
Well, that's an interesting argument. I'm just looking for the data at the moment. So there is no data, but we are anticipating that this will provide a greater ecological benefit, will preserve the neighbor's property, et cetera, et cetera. And I can support that. I'm curious, though, the discussion at the planning board level must have been quite vigorous. What is the argument against the administration's recommendation? Because I'm looking at a 4-3 vote.
There were a lot of questions. I'm not sure if, well, no, you haven't read the minutes yet because I don't send them out until Thursday. I'm hesitant to speak, to say what someone else's intentions were or what was going through their mind when they were making their vote. No one can really know that but them. Having said that, I didn't hear a lot of this is why I'm against it or for it. It was just a bunch of questions and inquiries and then a vote. And that will be reflected in the minutes, which you're encouraged to look at.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we don't have those minutes, but as a body that recommends to council, I think it's important that we at least look at the arguments that were made in the planning board process. I wouldn't expect you to speak for the planning board. I'm just curious as to, clearly there were some concerns and questions. I'll leave it at that.
I will say one thing, now that you mentioned it, that was talked about at length, was the idea of just removing Lomers altogether and just doing away with it completely. And I think some of them just wanted to do that instead.
Would you
Is that
say
possible?
Yeah.
How long have Lomers been in effect? I've never heard of a Lomer. I've heard of a Loma.
Right?
Loma's fairly new, isn't it?
I mean, they
I don't
exist for a
recall
reason.
anybody doing a Lomer the whole 8 years I was in building inspections.
I would not recommend getting rid of the Lomer option. I think they exist for a reason. They provide someone with the ability to come into better compliance with our hazard mitigation plan policies, to remove themselves from the flood, to help decrease flooding to their property and the surrounding areas. Lomers, in my opinion, are a good thing, and it's part of the standard model ordinance for flood zones.
Do we have the authority, much less the discretion, to remove it? That question was on the floor. Your answer is yes, but it's not advisable, or no, we can't do it?
I guess that's a two-part answer. I wouldn't recommend it as a best practice for several reasons. We can go more restrictive. So my answer to that is yes, pending any change Brian might have to my answer. But yeah, you can go more restrictive.
But not do away with it. So what would be the adverse effect on Councilman Weinkauf's suggestion of putting it to 1 to make all across the board the same?
I'm not saying that would have an adverse effect. We haven't seen 2 feet to be something that has caused a lot of problems, particularly given that Lomers, we don't get a ton of them. We only had 4 or 5 last flood zone. That seems to be about an average from the past fills that we've seen, past Lomer fills.
So basically, the reason this was brought to us is because there's not a cap on it as of now.
Right, and we want to set one.
Before it becomes an issue.
Exactly.
Well, I'm gonna try this then.
Okay,
I wanna make
Jeff.
a motion to amend the text amendment to 1 foot and to still have an engineered field plan to show how water will be directed and retained on site and not have runoff to adjacent neighbor.
Yeah, call for a second.
Second.
All in favor, show of hands, please.
Can I ask a question?
Well, yeah.
Too late now.
What's your question, Jim?
Does that mean that anything over 1 foot has to have the engineer plan?
No, it's 1 foot, but they still have to have the engineer plan with the 1 foot.
To do a Loma or a Lomer?
Yeah.
Got it.
May I ask a question too? Just to clarify for the record. So that amendment was, or included a revision to definition under section A3 of the UDO and for fill, and also the amendment to section 10.104.1, but making the change that it's 1 foot instead of 2 feet. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Lisa.
What's Jay? Do you need Jay to clarify that, Lisa?
No, I just want to make sure, I just wanted to get on the record that that's what your motion was, to amend.
Moving on. We have no presentations tonight. I'll call for approval or amendment to the agenda, please.
We do have one amendment, I'm sorry.
We do?
The third budget ordinance amendment, we need to change one of those numbers.
Oh, we have an amendment, we don't have any problems.
Yeah, we just need to change.
What is the number, Lisa?
On page 18. Yeah, the numbers need to read the same. On line B, it should be 1444414. Shows a typo.
Yeah.
Typo, okay.
At least it's a typo in the right direction. I like that.
Yes, sir.
We're just making the correction, we're not removing it.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any more corrections or amendments? Okay, at this time I'll call for approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, please. Thank you. Public comment section. Do we have anyone signed up, Lisa?
Yes, ma'am. Jerry Hardy.
Hardy, the rules, I think you're pretty familiar with. State your name. And you have a 3-minute limit.
Jerry Hardy, 134 Northeast 11th. I'm here for the Beach Preservation Society Incorporated. Beach Preservation has had a whirlwind month since council approved our move from the town committee to a nonprofit organization last August 13th. We moved quickly to establish organizational status with the IRS, with the North Carolina Secretary of State, and our banking system, and await word on our 501c3 status. We do need assistance from the town attorney in assuring that our Be a Beach Lover trademark is protected for another 10 years, and we hope to discuss that with Mr. Eads soon. The visibility of the new nonprofit is growing with events and donations. Watch for a new rollout accessibility mat to be added at the pier complex. This will be 5 foot by 100 foot, and it'll allow a much smoother walkway to the beach. We'll also have a 2 by 5 foot sign stating that compliments of the Beach Preservation Society. For members, our inaugural membership meeting will be at 7 p.m. on Friday, the September 20th, here in this room. Please add your name to the list on the table if you're a member who will be coming. We have some sign-up sheets over here. For the community, we will be conducting an international coastal cleanup on Saturday, September 21st. This will be at the Cabana from 9 a.m. until noon. We hope to clean the entire beach and count what we find. Access parents will be collecting in their areas during the week of September 14th to the 21st. Also for the community, our first public lecture will be Friday, October 4th at 7 p.m. at 801 Ocean Event Center. We invite everyone to come out and find out what's the big deal about microplastics from our guest speaker. Information is on our Facebook page, and there's a list on the table to register. Again, that's over here on this table. It's free, but we need to count to know who's coming. And then lastly, we have teachers and non-formal educators are invited to a similar workshop on Saturday, October 5th at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Rec Center. You can get an application form at our website, okibpsi@gmail.com, and the cost is $25, but lunch is included. We hope to have a new website soon, and follow us on Facebook. And thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. Anyone else, Lisa?
Tara Boyle?
Dara Royal, 216 Northeast 47th Street. I'll be speaking on the budget amendment mentioned earlier. In the fall of 2017, the Gold Leaf Foundation awarded a grant to the town of Oak Island in the amount of $1.5 million to demolish and rebuild the Yopon Pier when it was condemned after being severely damaged during Hurricane Matthew. Like many grants, Golden Leaf Foundation funds are released on a reimbursement basis. So you need to have the money up front to do the project, and after the project is completed, you get your money back. In this case, Council has approved the transfer of funds from the 3% accommodations tax fund to the Pier Capital Project Fund over the course of the project as needed. The use of the 3% accommodations tax is not restricted to use for beach nourishment. Even if it were, money could still be borrowed from the fund and paid back later. I heard over the weekend that an individual was pulling numbers from the 2017-18 audit to raise doubts about how the town was spending money to build the pier. Specifically, the audit showed that $663,549 was transferred from accommodations tax fund to the Pier Project Fund to finance the building of the pier. The next audit, 2018-19, will show an additional transfer from accommodations tax to the pier project. But the 2019-2020 audit will show a transfer in the opposite direction. The Budget Amendment Council will approve tonight will receive revenue from the Golden Leaf Grant in the amount of $1,444,414 into the Pier Project Fund, and then transfer that same amount of money out of the Pier Project Fund and back into the Accommodations Tax Fund as a reimbursement. GASB, the Governmental Standards Accounting Board, is the authoritative body that establishes GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, for local governments. The use of funds in this manner is fundamental to governmental accounting and reporting for the purpose of carrying on specific activities with special regulations, restrictions, and limitations. When a grant provides, the grantor will pay the grantee on a reimbursement basis. GASB standards require that the grant net revenue not be recognized until the qualifying expenditures have been incurred. In short, any doubts raised about how the town is paying for the pier project have no basis in reality when those doubts are from one individual who is taking out of context one number from one audit from a multi-year capital project funded with a reimbursement grant. That's not to say that there aren't policy decisions made about what money is spent on what projects, but the accounting for this project and everything else in the budget is done properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roll. Lisa, any more?
Anyone else sign up?
Okay, at this time, we will move on with the agenda. Thank you all for your comments. Council reports. Normally I don't start with the mayor, but this night I'm going to start with the mayor because they're going to steal my thunder. We've just come through one heck of a week. of stress and worry and concern for our residents and our town and our infrastructures, because we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what to expect with Florence. We can just do the best we can as we do it. I'd like to, at this time, recognize our staff for the amazing communication and job that they did during this whole prior week. My hat's off. Thank you, staff. I don't know much more I can say that would top that, except I'm glad that we missed a hard blow, because I don't think any of us wanted to see that, what we went through with Florence again. Now, Mr. Weintraub.
No report, Madam Mayor.
Huh?
No report.
No report? Oh, my. Councilman Blakelock. Excuse me.
Wait a minute, I gotta,
Mark this day down in history.
nothing? I just want to echo what the mayor said. I think it was great. I love the way the community came together to help each other out. I saw several neighbors helping neighbors with trees falling in their backyard and things like that. And ladies and gentlemen, we were lucky, very, very lucky. And say a prayer for the folks in Jamaica. I mean, Bahamas, because that's just terrible. Thank you.
I have no report,
Councilman
Mayor.
Scott? Councilman Bell? Councilman Bach? The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, kudos to the poise and professionalism of our administrative leadership and our staff, and I'll share a comment that a member of the public was making to Lisa, that our communication was spot on and precise, much improved from the last storm. So Lisa, thank you for taking charge of that. I guess my comment is, wobble is generally a word that has a negative connotation in our language, but this time it wobbled the right way. So we're thankful for the wobble. The other thing I would say for Councilman Scott's moment of silence is the horror of that day, 9/11, is indelibly burned into everyone's memory. I find it helpful to look at some of the detail. So there's an excellent book called Report from Ground Zero by Daniel Smith. And in that book, it tells the story of Ladder Company 3 from the East Village. They had the second highest casualty rate. They lost 11 members. They were led by Captain Patrick Brown, the most decorated firefighter in the city at the time. The alarm went off during a shift change, and so they rode heavy with both crews, and their truck was entombed. It has been at JFK Airport since 9/11 and is now going to the museum and will be an exhibit. So thinking about that kind of heroism where they didn't hesitate, they went straight into danger, is helpful, I think, and helps us not to forget. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, moving on to the consent agenda. I'll call for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. There are no committee appointments tonight. We have administrative reports next. Mr. Kelly.
Yes, ma'am. We would like to thank staff for all the work they had and done through the storm, and we continue to work. We'll be picking up the yard debris right now on schedule. As we evaluate that, we'll see what we need to change or do, but right now we're on schedule as is posted on normal pickup. We may be looking at bringing in one contractor to assist with that, so we can stay on schedule, but we'll evaluate that as we go. If we see we're starting to fall behind, then we will look at making a change. According to the sign for the intersection that the gentleman was talking about, we have been working with DOT. We told them what we would put up there for the sign to talk about last exit and the next exit, just like he referred to. And they told us that was a DOT right away and they wouldn't allow us to put our signs in there. So we appealed to them that we needed some information. Then a few months later, they put back the hurricane evacuation sign. They indicated that should be a directional sign and people know that's where they need to turn. We have asked the regional office to look into being able to, for us to place signs or wayward signs. And if we need to apply for the wayward sign, then that's what we'll do. But I think we'll use the minutes from tonight's meeting to again send up the chain, as Councilman Weinkauf referred to a little while ago.
Yes.
And call Chad Kimes directly and see if he can help us with the
A
information.
letter,
side.
if you need a letter from the mayor also may help.
So we can see if we can get that moving. We understand it's a DOT right away, but we need to have some informational signs in there as well.
I agree.
So we will address
This is
that.
in direct conversation with Mr. Stanton's request.
And that's all we have at this time.
All right, thank you. Brian, do you have anything tonight?
Just earlier this summer, the General Assembly passed a House bill that clarifies that cities and towns have the right to close DOT roads within their jurisdiction during a declared state of emergency. I think we've already had the right, but next month with staff and I will be bringing back an proposed amendment to our Code of Ordinances to follow that new House bill.
State's bill.
Madam Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Edwards, if I may.
Sure.
So this is a night of acronyms. I love this one. This is another one. BCEGS. Thank you for the memo. If you would just take a moment for the public's edification. What does it mean? Our rating has improved. Theoretically, our insurance costs will go down. Can you encapsulate that?
Councilman Bott, can you please tell us where you're at and what we're referring to?
The memo that was issued to council and the mayor.
In the additional department reports that I handed out this evening.
I was a little late getting my reports to Lisa to have them.
Since it's good news, can you encapsulate this? It looks like this.
It's the BSEGS, Building Code Efficiency Grading System. And what that is ISO, which is the Insurance
Services Office.
Thank you. I don't have any paperwork in front of me. I apologize. But what they do is they rate municipalities on their ability to enforce building codes and the implementation of building codes. And based off of what council has provided us with staff and the departmental goals that we needed and continuing education and the enforcement that we were allowed to do, we were able to get our grades back down. We hadn't had these grades since 2001. 2007, we were hurt in staffing, and 2013, again, didn't have the staff that they recognized as being needed for a municipality of this size. So through that being one of the many attributes to getting this grade, the other one is, the plan review process that we have in place, the permitting reports that we're able to produce in detail. They just don't want a number how many houses were built. They want numbers of plumbing, electrical, mechanical, accessory structures. They want detailed reports. And with the software that we were able to purchase, I guess it's going on 4 years ago, we can produce those reports in detail. So there's been a lot of things that this council has done that has helped us to get this grade back to where we are. And staff's appreciative of y'all being able to do that for us and for the citizens, because that's what it counts. Now with this BSEG grade that we have now, which is a 4 for the residential and 4 for the industrial and commercial, which is a good grade. With that 4, it allows us to ask for a modification to our community rating system, which is the CRS program that we participate in, National Flood Insurance, which currently we have a 7. We were locked at an 8 for a long time because of building codes and not being adopted to the full extent for windborne debris. There was a ban put on oceanfront properties not enforcing windborne debris all the way to Highway 17. But with that said, they've lifted that ban, and with this new BSEG rating, we can petition ask for a modification to reduce that rating to a 6, which staff has done that. Dave Kelly administered the paperwork that was needed to seek that reduction, and hopefully come May 1st of next year, we'll see a CRS rating of 6, which would be another 5% reduction in flood insurance. And it's a good thing.
Thank you. I thought it was important I'm sorry, I picked up my copy early, but thank you for the hard work. Anytime you reduce or in this case, increase your rating by 50%, you're doing something right, and it will result in savings for all of us as citizens, so thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Well, before we start into the old business, we might as well say something else and remind everybody that next month is our open town hall meeting. So, Lee, can we get that note of that in the paper? And we hope to see a bunch of people here, and we'll be open conversation. It's one of our favorite formats, correct?
Correct.
So that will be the last one of this year, I
It is,
believe, until January, and then there'll be another, hopefully. All right, moving on to old business, which we have none of. And we're going on to new business, and number one is consideration of amendment to Chapter 32, Section 32-1, definition to the amendment definition of hazardous tree. And I'm going to read this summary because I think it's important that we understand what this ordinance is about. The proposed ordinance amendment for Chapter 32 is staff initiated. The current definition of hazardous tree says any tree that has the potential of causing property damage or loss. The criteria staff uses to determine if a tree is hazardous is as follows. If the tree leans at a dangerous, extreme, unnatural angle, if the tree is rotted out, and if the tree roots are ripped from the ground. This is a common sense approach. Every tree has a certain amount of natural lean to it, but typically a hazardous dead tree is easily definable. A proposed ordinance revises the hazardous tree definition to include the criteria, making the definition more specific. Does anyone have any questions for Jake? All right. Entertain a motion to approve or deny.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the proposed ordinance amendment.
Second, Madam Mayor.
All in favor? Thank you. Number two on the new business is consideration of request for phase major subdivision. Let me get to that. Preliminary plat for a major subdivision located at Southeast 72nd and Southeast 73rd Street was approved at the August 13th, 2019 Town Council meeting. The proposed major subdivision is within Oak Island's jurisdiction. Parcel number 250BL022. The developer is requesting a major subdivision be divided into two phases. The attached color-coded map is submitted by the applicant showing all the phases is proposed for the major subdivision. The first phase, is for the first four lots off of Southeast 72nd Street, and the second phase request is for the last four lots off of Southeast 73rd Street. The developer is requesting council approval for the proposed subdivision phase for the major subdivision. And did this go before the planning board, Jake? Okay.
They approved the subdivision last month, right?
Jake?
Yeah.
You approved the subdivision last month.
Yeah.
And he should have asked for the phase construction at that point. So we had him bring it back.
Okay, gotcha. Any questions for Jake?
Just confirmation. So as described at the last meeting, this proposal is completely in accordance with our UDO. All the necessary documents have been submitted. This is a, in quotes, routine request, correct?
It's still compliant. He hasn't changed anything on his preliminary plat, which you guys approved last month. He's just asking, as you can see on the attached map, that he didn't ask for it to be phased at the beginning, and he informed me after it was approved, the preliminary plat, which gave him the vested rights, that he wanted to phase it the way the mayor described. So yes, to summarize, it's still 100% compliant with the ordinances.
That's what I wanted to hear you say. And the timeline for completion is now adjusted because he's phasing it?
Well, he hasn't given me a timeline. I know his vested rights will expire after a 2-year period if he refused to do anything between now and then. Seems very unlikely to me. But the timeline has not been hammered out yet, but it is not a large, it's only 8 lots. It's not a large subdivision. I wouldn't expect it to take very long.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. I entertain a motion to approve or disapprove.
Motion to approve the major subdivision phasing request for parcel 250BL022.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor, show of hands. Thank you, Lisa. Moving on to number 3. Enclosed for the council consideration is a lease for cell phone equipment on the tower or on the ground for the Southeast 56th Street water tower. It's the pleasure of the council. Entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor and Council, if there is a motion and a second to approve it, I would request that that be contingent upon town attorney approval of the final terms.
I have a question for Mr. Kelly, I suppose. So this particular proposal, is this the result of an RFP?
No, this is the vendor himself is asking to go on to the tower. They have looked at the coverage that they provide on the island, and they need to have additional coverage, and they're going to bring in some more Wi-Fi connections through their system. So they approach us, and then we analyze the tower. We talk. It's basically them coming to us.
Okay, but what I'm trying, let me rephrase my question. My question, I guess, is does this number, which is a significant number, right? It's $317,000. Is this number the correct price point? Do we know what the price point for stringing arrays on water towers for cell phone, we know what it's worth?
Yes. It's in line with everything else that we currently have in the system. The provider that we have, Southern Corrosion, is our maintenance provider. They provide us information on other contracts through other carriers, and then we're able to analyze it. This has been going on probably for about a year and a half, analyzing this one site, and this is what it came down to. They bring a number to us, and then we send a number back, and those kind of things.
Okay, so we have a high degree of confidence this is the right number.
Yes, sir.
For what we're giving them.
Yes, sir.
And I would
That's
just,
the way it looks, but it brings in lots of money.
Don't look up.
Councilmember Bach, I would just add that it's in line with, the price point is at least in line with other municipal clients of mine.
Thank you, Counselor. That's comforting. That's what I was searching for.
Yes, sir.
Entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the lease agreement with Cellco Partnership doing business as Verizon Wireless as presented, contingent on approval by the town attorney.
Second, please. All in favor? Very good, thank you. Moving on to Mr. Eves, do we need a closed session?
Bree, it will, yes, ma'am.
Entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion we go into closed session to consult with the town attorney to preserve the attorney-client privilege pursuant to NCGS 143-318-11A3.
Second, please.
Yes, I read that.
All in favor? Thank you. Thank you for coming, guys.
Winter close.
I call the meeting back to order, and I'd like to state that no action was taken during the closed session.
Madam Mayor, it's been brought to my attention that on the text amendment, the field text amendment, that the motion did not include a statement that it was, it did not include the plan consistency statement. So I request, one, that there be a motion adopted to suspend the rules, and two, that with respect to that text amendment, the board adopt the associated plan consistency statement.
Entertain a motion.
So moved to suspend the rules, Madam Mayor.
All in favor?
Second.
Second, please. All in favor? And number 2, Mr. Eves?
If we could have a motion to adopt the associated plan consistency statement for the field text amendment that was passed earlier.
Motion, please.
I'll make a motion to adopt the associated plan consistency statement with the field amendment that was passed earlier tonight.
Second, please. Second, all in favor? Now I entertain a motion to close this town hall meeting.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Adjourn. To adjourn, excuse me.
Second.
All in favor? All right, thank you. See y'all again.